Hello and welcome to the City of Cedar Falls Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, February 26, 2025. I call this meeting to order. Could we get a roll call, please?
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here.
Okay. I don't know if your mic's on, Karen. Perfect. Thank you. All right. First agenda item tonight is approval of minutes. Looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right. A voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. That goes into record. This is the time of the meeting for any public comment for anything that is not on the agenda tonight. Is anyone? Okay. We will bring it back for new business tonight. We have a vacation of a portion of Campus Street up south of 23rd Street. So,
I will be recusing myself from this.
okay.
I will be recusing myself also.
Okay, we have two recusing tonight because of you and I. All right, and tonight who has this?
I will.
Michelle, all right, thank you.
That was very loud, so we'll see how we do. So the area that we would like to vacate is completely surrounded by the campus at University of Northern Iowa. Oh, sorry about that. The portion of the street is I already said that. Portion of the street is surrounded by University of Northern Iowa, and there's also part of a building on campus that has been placed on this street, which is the Commons Building, and it's been there since 1932. So looking at the criteria for a vacation, is this part of the street needed for public use? The city has no use for this dead-end street that serves you and I. The utilities within the right-of-way are already considered to be maintained by University of Northern Iowa. And then is this needed for private use? The surrounding properties are owned by the state, and the utilities within the right-of-way are the stormwater, water line, gas line. They would be serving only the campus, and they're already maintaining those utilities. So staff has found that the criteria for the vacation has been met and recommends approval, and I'm available for any questions.
All right, thank you. Commission have any questions for staff? Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak to this item?
Well, the question I would have is, do they have to buy it then? I know other things we vacated before had to be purchased by homeowners.
And since this is a government agency to a government agency, there is no sale of the property.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I think they're working on a swap of some property. There's some additional property UNI has that the city's using for public parking. And so I think the idea is to swap properties in the end. So that's a separate item than the vacation.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Looking for a motion.
I would make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? Roll call vote, please.
Alberhaski.
Aye.
Hartley.
What?
Hartley.
Oh, aye. Sorry.
Henderson.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Sorensen.
Aye.
Stallnaker.
Aye.
Watkins. Aye. That motion carries.
All right, thank you. That finishes new business. Now move on to old business. Number 3 is City Code text amendment, major thoroughfare plan and street connectivity standards. I believe Karen has this tonight.
Yeah. Let's see if we can see on the screen here. So we have talked about this a few times. Here we have, we're going to be talking about the major update to the major thoroughfare plan and also some changes to the subdivision code related to street connectivity. I'm not going to go through this presentation again because we've gone through it several times for you. I do have the slides available I'll just quickly scroll through them. If there are questions, of course, we can go back to any of these slides and talk about any of these issues more carefully, especially if there's comments from the audience that we want to consider. So, again, this is the map. We've had that up on our website since August, looking at, this is a guide, the major thoroughfare plan. So that's really going to help us both for our CIP and for subdivisions when they come in as a guide to where those critical connections are going to be. Those are the arterial streets and the collector streets. So along with that, we had to make some code amendments to the actual code in the city code. That's in chapter 19. We've updated some definitions and made the language more consistent with the updated plan and also with the changes we're making to the subdivision code. And then moving on to the second half of the project, which is the street connectivity standards, we've talked a number of times about the benefits of having a connected street pattern and better standards in our code to provide clear standards. And the top two bullet points really are important ones to remember, is that we don't have clear standards in our code right now. And when you don't have a code that's clear, it creates a lot of negotiation, a lot of confusion. It slows projects down when we're reviewing subdivisions. So we're trying to update our code just like we're updating our zoning codes for more clear standards. We're trying to do the same thing with our subdivision code. So when we have vague language in our code, we try to make it less vague. And then we provide additional language when we need to make exceptions. So that's what we've tried to do here with these standards. And that just makes for fair and consistent reviews for all developers that come forward. And also the other thing that we've experienced quite a bit is that it's hard to always look forward, years in advance to land that's adjacent to land being developed, whether it's a city expansion at the edge of town or we have different properties that come up for development at different times. And we don't want to back ourselves into a corner and leave a piece of property out that could be developed in the future. And that's what's happened in a number of different instances where we've gotten many calls about, hey, I would like to develop this piece of property, and then finding out that we didn't have enough street connections there to make it feasible, or the utilities weren't extended there, because usually the utilities are extended with the street. And so having more clear standards will help guide everybody as a reminder that we need to have those adequate connections from one subdivision to another so that we can continue to grow efficiently. So those are two important points, other than all the many other points here of benefits about walking and biking and improving safety, reducing emergency response times, and providing efficient routes for utilities and services, and then reducing traffic congestion within the neighborhoods and along the major streets as well. The more connections you have, the more it distributes the traffic throughout the city. So in the subdivision code, we updated definitions, we updated right-of-way widths, we added definitions and diagrams to demonstrate the new standards we put in place, so it's clear how they're going to be measured. We added a whole exception section to provide more flexibility, because every piece of ground is different, has different topography, has different features, might have a floodway, might have a stream corridor, steep and sloping land. So we recognize that subdivision design is not always easy to do for developers. And so, we have a bunch of exceptions built into the code for those kinds of situations. So this is kind of small on the screen here, but these are the specific standards that we added to the code. I wanted to point out a couple alternatives. At the last meeting, there were some concerns expressed, and since that meeting, we've had Mr. Fairbanks came in and talked with staff and had some other discussions, and so we wanted to offer an alternative standard to even provide more flexibility on that block length standard if there's additional concerns about what we have proposed here. And that alternative standard, instead of just having a blanket maximum block length is 600 feet, even though we have all those other exceptions in the code, an alternate standard would be a block length range from 200 to 800 feet, with majority within the 300 to 600 foot range. That would mean that there would be some additional flexibility to adjust those block lengths, to not leave leftover land, to make it efficient for the developer, to provide some flexibility in the size of the blocks to fit within the land that they have. So, but then focusing as the majority of the blocks within that 300 to 600 foot range, which is what matches the state of Iowa SUDA standards as recommendations for intersection spacing for local streets. Similarly, on the maximum perimeter block length, because those two standards kind of go hand in hand, if somebody had an 800-foot block with a standard 150-foot deep lot, that would mean that the perimeter would have to be 2,200 feet. So we would bump that perimeter block length up to that 2,200-foot range. So those are two alternatives we would like to put on the table for discussion tonight. The other standards, I think, we felt were pretty solid. And I did want to talk a little bit about that flexibility, because I didn't want there to be any confusion about, that we're going to be really rigid about this and not allow development of land that we have available. Of course, we're going to adjust things where there's natural barriers, such as stream corridors, floodplains, ravines, where those block lengths are not going to, we're going to need longer blocks in those locations. For large lot development, we've got industrial parks, we've got large business parks, agricultural districts, of course, which are large. And then we do have some desire occasionally for, large residential lots, sort of estate lots. So those blocks, it would probably make sense to have those a bit longer. And then along arterial streets, where obviously we don't want connections, on a really, we want to control those connections onto the arterial streets. So we'll look at those fairly carefully, and some longer blocks that will be necessary there. And of course, along the highways where we don't have access, of course, we can't have the connections to the state highways in those locations where there's limited access. And then to accommodate large neighborhood facilities and institutions such as school grounds, churches, large parks, regional stormwater facilities. Those large institutions are important in our neighborhoods, and so we're going to have to adjust things when we have those kinds of things proposed in a neighborhood. So we provided these last time on how to measure, and we still have those slides. I won't go through these in detail, but these are how those standards then will be measured, and those will be in the code, so it'll be easy for everybody to know how that's measured, how to measure a cul-de-sac and a block length, and the perimeter block length. And I do want to note for the developers in the crowd that the block length and the perimeter block length are measured at the right-of-way line, so not at the street curb. So actually the blocks are, if you're thinking about a block being from street to street, if the block length is 600 feet as measured on the right-of-way line, on the front property line, for example, there's additional right-of-way there, so the block length from street to street is even longer. But this will make it much easier for people to measure that when we have subdivisions come in for review. And then this idea of the through block sidewalk. So when we do have longer blocks and we need access for the neighbors that live in that neighborhood, and for everybody to get access to public trails, for example, along a stream corridor or a floodway, along the river or dry run creek, those are important connections to make. And then just an illustration of, how those streets should be continued to the property boundary for connection onto adjacent properties. And we had talked about how that was a problem in some areas for walkability when you do that and have those kind of right angle turns to the street, and how many problems that's created in the community. And then again, a way to give credit to neighborhood park space when you're measuring the perimeter block length, we'll subtract out the frontage for those green spaces. And then if the institution's even larger, it would fall into that flexibility, that exception category. So small neighborhood parks, you get credit for those and don't have to use those measurements for your perimeter block length. And for the larger institutional uses, large facilities, large parks, of course, that's just an exception to the rule that we would consider. I do have additional slides in case there's questions I knew that might come up, so we can go through some of those things about cul-de-sacs and private streets if those are still questions in people's minds. But one last reminder is, there's some concern about having P&Z and council have to review exceptions. Those would be reviewed right at the time you're reviewing the subdivisions. So all subdivisions have to go through P&Z and council. So if there's any exceptions to anything, it will all just be discussed at the time the subdivision is reviewed. So there's no extra step to get an exception to the rule.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions for staff?
I had a question. So I haven't been on this commission very long, but I believe I've seen a few times where this has been a problem with thoroughfares, with old subdivisions or old developments. Just on a back of the envelope basis, how frequently do you see this as being a problem with prior subdivisions or neighborhoods?
Well, I think when it becomes apparent is when you have new development proposed, and then we realize, oh, we don't have a connection here for you to make. Even just at, the whole big discussion of Meadow Ridge, one of the discussion points was traffic, right? Well, the traffic problem is not necessarily from new development occurring. It's because we have no connections in that whole area. So all the traffic, is on First Street. First Street is designed to handle lots of traffic, but the people that live on that cul-de-sac, of course, as development occurs and the state highway handles that traffic, they will have to wait longer there. But that's a function of the fact that they live on a cul-de-sac and the street doesn't go through. So if the street went through, they'd have another route during those peak times when traffic is excessive there.
So this new zoning or new regulation is really to look out at future development and to try to solve those problems before they occur, given what we've already seen happen from the past.
That's right. We can't correct the past necessarily. We're just trying to get better in the future.
Great. Thank you.
I would point out that half the Meadows traffic problem is because that we let the school build a school with no frontage road to it. They were waiting for a private developer to put that frontage road in, so that was partially whoever let that happen, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we could look back and see all kinds of mistakes, and sometimes you're looking, I think, not to blame past reviewers, but you look at each development on its own, and sometimes we have blinders on of the implications for the future. And when you have better standards in the code, that helps guide the process better so we don't make those mistakes, I guess.
Would you mind going back to the slide that talked about block length and perimeter length? I think you'd asked for potentially some discussion on that. Sorry, it was a while back.
Right.
So this one right here, one just point of clarification I was looking for is the third main bullet there about streets stubbing every 600 feet. If either of those other exceptions in red or the other variations in red were approved, would that third one also need to be edited?
I think we want to keep pretty strongly on that one because that's the one that prevents the neighboring property from being developed.
But if we had an
don't have-
800-foot block, I mean, then a 600-foot stub couldn't go through there, right? Or I'm
Well,
trying
it
to,
depends on how the
balance
blocks are oriented. So, there's lots of different ways to slice the pie when you're designing a subdivision. So in that particular case, we'd probably insist on a 600-foot block there. So in other words, it's all part of, the standard would be allow a variation, but a majority of them have to be in that range. And so I think along the edge there, that standard is pretty.
so the 800-foot block, if there was one, might be somewhere more in the middle is,
Right, and all of that, like I said, it's hard to think about every different permutation of this because every piece of ground is different. But we would, that's the kind of thing that would help us in the discussions with developers is, hey, we do need 2 connections here. So can we orient the blocks in a way that we can get those 2 connections and then, work through the other block lengths?
On that same note, I would question or point out that we show in the next page or 2, we show a drawing that shows a 600-foot block, and then we show 8 lots. Well, we're showing 8 lots that are 75 foot. That's not accurate in the real world because the end lots, the corner lot, has a setback on the side and the front. So those lots, to be developed correctly, need to be more like 90 foot. Otherwise, you can build a very small house on those lots.
So we have different zones that have different lot sizes. So the diagrams here are just to demonstrate how to measure.
Sure.
They're not
That's-
supposed to be showing how many lots you get in a block because every subdivision is going to be based on the zoning district that you have. And we even have planned developments where you can get really narrow lots. So you could have lots of lots on a block. So it wasn't meant to indicate
Right.
how many lots you'd get on the block.
I would just say that the demand is for increasingly bigger lots from consumers, not smaller lots. So when we try and cram those in, we're going to end up with 4 or 5 houses in that block potentially, if we have 600 foot to get everybody that wants to buy a lot, that wants a bigger house, that wants 3-stall garages and still have some frontage, not just a garage, It's hard to do on a 70-foot lot to build a 3-stall garage and not have
Right.
all garage in the front.
Right, yeah.
So,
Yep. And I would say there's probably as much demand for smaller lots as there are for larger lots. We have a lot of different subdivisions come in with R2 lots. A lot of subdivisions that come in with standard lots that they want a setback reduction, so they ask for the RP zoning, so they can get a smaller side yard to fit a bigger house. So there's
but
lots of different.
The standard would be applied to every price range, right? Even if I wanted to build a neighborhood with 1-acre lots, I'd have to have a cross street every 600 feet. Well, that's potentially every 2 lots.
Well, that's why we wrote the exception for the large estate lots into the code.
Karen, could you maybe clarify where these numbers were driven from? If it's, other local cities or, or where this initially, what's the reasoning behind why it was landed
Yeah,
on these?
I know you were on the commission when we went through the
Yeah.
presentation back in August. But yeah, we looked at other cities in the area, and I don't remember if I might have included that slide at the end here. I'm not sure which ones I included.
it was in the packet.
Oh, maybe not. All right. Yeah, so in that presentation, I think, which we included in your packet, that presentation showed the different cities that we looked at. Cedar Rapids, Ames, Iowa City, City of Pellow, and Mason City have all adopted. And most of these codes are about 10 years or more have been on the books for these cities, so it's not like they're just recent. All of those cities have a maximum block length of 600 feet. The maximum perimeter block length, not everybody has a standard in the code, but the 2 that do, they have 1,800 feet and 1,600 feet. The maximum cul-de-sac length is 600 feet in 3 of the cities It's 900 feet in Iowa City, and we already have a 600-foot cul-de-sac length standard, which is based on our fire code. So that standard's already on the books, and that's one of the reasons we looked at SUDA standards. The SUDA standard says that recommendation is intersections every 300 to 600 feet for local streets. So that's a statewide guide that's put out by state, engineers, the city engineers around the state. So we based it on a lot of research that we did. It's also, if you think about arterial street spacing, we talk about half a mile to a mile. And then we talk about collector street spacing at a quarter mile. And so, you just go down the increment, half of a quarter mile sort of a thing so we based it on a lot of
Great.
research.
Thanks for clarifying that again.
All right, any more questions for staff? Otherwise, I will open it up to the public. Anyone from the public like to come up and speak? Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Andrew Schroll, 2523 Hawthorne Drive. I'm serving as chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission and want to make a few comments on behalf of the commission. We want to support these updates to the major thoroughfare plan as well as the street connectivity standards. We think this is a great opportunity to align multiple initiatives. For us, as discussed, it helps ensure access and connectivity to schools, parks, your neighbors, other destinations. Connectivity is one of the biggest focuses for improvement, both for walking and biking from our commission and for the city. It's not just a small benefit, it's a major improvement. Through blocks, sidewalks are also a benefit that far exceeds the investment here. I've seen these used very well in other cities. We also have the opportunity to be involved with the Parks Master Plan right now, and the park frontage incentive is a nice benefit going along with the theme of our city, our parks. Parks, we want to be visible fixtures and centers of our community, and I think this helps it. And then there's emergency response improvements and benefits for drivers too. When we have the spreading out of traffic, we have calming of traffic, and a better overall complete streets approach for everybody. So we voted unanimously to urge these changes to go forward. And it's an important quality of life and community and appeal change. It's consistent with a growing trend of correcting neighborhood design issues that really only started in the grand scheme of things a few decades ago or several decades ago. And then to wrap up, I'd like to make a few comments on just on my own. I think this plan really adds a lot of flexibility or includes flexibility to meet needs of others, including developers. If you think about the 600-foot block length, I think that's very reasonable. That's still 2 football fields. Neighborhoods can still have character and appeal and be reasonably designed and developed. And I have confidence that Cedar Falls will continue to grow, and this is an opportunity to help our growth happen in the best way. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone else from the public like to speak?
My name is Jack Yates, and I live at 519 Chateau Court. I'm also on the Bicycle Pedestrian Commission, and that's why I decided to go ahead and come up, because I'm kind of just following up on what Andrew had to say. Before I heard the detailed presentation on June 4th, 2024 by city staff, I had no idea what connectivity was. Maybe having to do with electric cars or internet or something like that. But at the end of that presentation, I moved that we formally support the program, because I could see it was not something minor or small, but something very big in terms of the quality of life for every single citizen of Cedar Falls. And especially for those of us who bike and walk, because connectivity ensures that the distance from point A to point B is going to be minimized for people traveling around in the city. Now, bikers and walkers are especially sensitive to distance. If it's too far, I'm not going to walk, or if it's too far, I'm not going to bike. People in cars are less sensitive, well, they're certainly sensitive, but it's especially important for the quality of life in Cedar Falls that people be able to bike and walk comfortably from one point to another. So I strongly suggest that we continue to work on connectivity, and I hope you'll pass this plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Craig Fairbanks, 405 Spruce Hills. I think you all have my document. My head hurts from going through it. My issues are nothing about any of this except affordability. We continue to put down more concrete, and at a 600 foot, as Mr. Sorensen was talking about, in an 80-foot lot, you can only get 5 or 6 houses in. That just seems pretty short to me. There's no flexibility that's guaranteed in the ordinance. The 66-foot lots, I mean, we're taking away, by doing this, about 20% of the land that's available. We already have, as a developer, we already have creeks, streams. We didn't have all this stuff before. 500-foot floodplains. It is almost impossible without some kind of flexibility to get any kind of good usage out of lands and lots. We need the flexibility to do something with it. And if we can't get the costs under control, when I started, lots were $35,000. Now they're $125,000. How much more can we continue to push this? And maybe money doesn't matter to you, but it matters to those young buyers that are trying to come into town who can't be here. They're not here because they can't afford to be here. And we embarked on this housing plan well over a year ago. We've had many, many discussions about housing and how we can get affordability. I have nothing against trying to make the connectivity work. I don't have any problem with thoroughfares. I don't have any problems with any of the connectivity. But I do have a problem with the extra intersections and all the concrete that will increase the amount of retention that's required for every neighborhood. And that just takes out more ground as well. And maybe that's not important to you. But we say we care. We say we want inclusion, we want diversity. Those people can't come here. It's just not affordable. So with this plan, it's fine, but I still think there needs to be tweaks in it to make it work for everybody. It's great to have bike paths. We have lots. It's not like we don't have a lot. And the sidewalks in a subdivision, they're not made to ride bikes on unless there's one that's designated. So all those things are good things, but how can we do that and try to get some affordability? Now, Mr. Sorensen wants bigger lots. I want smaller lots for my customers, and you can't do that, but you go to other areas, for instance, the Des Moines area, and you look at what they do, and you'll see 20 houses in a row that you know are affordable housing without a block. That's how they get to affordability. It has to be done on a larger scale, otherwise it's just impossible. And if we keep cutting the streets down and dedicating them all to intersections, that's just not workable. It's just not going to happen. But if we're not really serious about affordability, pass whatever you think is appropriate. But it's a problem for customers. Only the affluent can come here. And that's in a modest house. There's no house out there that's probably less than $400,000 or $500,000. I can't even imagine it. Even in your neighborhood, as you know, David, that's almost an impossibility. Houses have risen from 400 to 650 in a matter of 3 or 4 years. What can we do as a zoning board? What can we do to help that and still accommodate all the other things that you want to accommodate? As I said, I don't have any objections to anything except how can we do both? How can we have affordability? How can we, because once we start down this path, this is set, okay? We don't want private streets. I for the life of me, I don't understand that one. Because if you do a condo project, why should the city want to take care of a condo project when that's the homeowners association to take care of? There's no liability to the city. Why do you want to get into private HOA business? I don't understand that. Because once those streets are in, you're talking about a ton of maintenance. It starts almost immediately. If you look at streets, from the time that they're put in, that maintenance starts right away. So I don't understand that one. And I still have reservations about 66-foot wide right-of-way. To me, to add another 6 feet is another reach that I don't think we need. We've talked with Karen about it, and you know, we've talked about utilities need someplace to go, but unfortunately, those utilities are in the owner's lot. There's a 10-foot easement inside the owner's lot to take care of those things. Do we really want tree plantings in that parking area that grow up, block traffic, block vision, block all that stuff? That bust sidewalks? So there's just a few things that I think there needs to be some changes to. And if you have any questions for me or comments, I'm fine with that. So thank you. Appreciate sharing.
All right, thank you very much. I'll bring it back to commission for any further discussion. Block length has come up, the right-of-way, 66 foot versus 60 foot. Yeah, I don't know what the right answer is necessarily. Because if we were to pass this tonight, we need to decide on either keeping it as written or your secondary proposal of.
Right, we would
block
want your
length.
recommendation on one or the other, and also, yeah, if there's anything in here that you think should be adjusted, you know, we can do that. I know Matt Tolan's here from the engineering department, the question about the 66-foot right-of-way, and he can comment on, you know, the utilities that are actually in the right-of-way and why we're thinking about needing that increase.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of the discussion, increasing 66 foot, kind of a different combination of aspects. Just starting off with the utilities, providing that additional space there could help eliminate some of those 10-foot private utility easements that we find in the new subdivisions, help bring those back into behind the back of curb zone, allow us to have the spacing needed to have separation between different facilities. Also, with the increased right-of-way, we have better alignment with our sidewalk facilities, specifically at intersections. You may notice in maybe some of the areas that we only have 60-foot right-of-ways, the intersections kind of come together in a pie wedge or like a really small space at the intersection, causing a longer crossing distance at the intersection because now the pedestrian, instead of crossing at the opposing curb, now they're crossing through the radii of the intersection, so they actually have a longer distance to cross. And then another reason, we actually have 66-foot right-of-ways in the community, so we have varying widths of right-of-way throughout the city. So this would be more of a comprehensive approach to just kind of straighten up a lot of the right-of-ways and match into some of our existing areas without having a jog in the right-of-way.
And then I would just add, you know, the kinds of utilities that are already in the right-of-way. I think Mr. Fairbanks is right. There are some private utilities and some electric lines that are in that 10-foot easement on the private property, but sewer, water, storm sewer, fiber, all those things are actually in the right-of-way. So those are all the things that have to fit in that space along with the street trees and, you know, so I think that's, you know, just providing a consistent standard across the city. And I think our public works staff would also appreciate more room for snow storage in the wintertime. We've heard that from our public works staff.
Okay, thank you. Could you bring the slide up that talked about the block length and your alternate proposal?
We're going to have to come through here quite a ways. Let's oh, let's back a slide here. I think that's the one. Hit the, Michelle, it's up there. It's on this.
It's there, it's just really small to read.
There we go.
Oh, Michelle, the IT expert, thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Michelle.
So right now, the proposal is a 600-foot, and you're saying an alternate could range from 2 to 800, or?
Well, on the short, there's always a short end of the block. So if we're going to talk about blocks in general, we could have the standard just say block length should range from 2 to 800 feet, with a majority within that 300 to 600-foot range. And staff is completely comfortable with that alternative language if the commission wants to go that direction.
I think that offers some flexibility versus just saying it has to be 600 feet.
I agree. I think a little bit of flexibility with that would be
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I will say, though, that they're building in exceptions to recognizing that each subdivision or development is different. I do think it's certainty, though, having that in there with some certainty about what the range is, so it's not an exception to the ordinance. So I'm not opposed to it, but I appreciate the fact that the city is baking in the ordinance that type of flexibility so that this is not, it's not as problematic depending upon, what the situation is. And I think just from a big picture standpoint, that's helpful both to the public as well as to developers. And we have the ability, as we look at the subdivisions or other plans, that we can consider those situations and use the exceptions that are built in to the ordinance.
For some of these communities that have had these similar guidelines on the books for a decade, have there been any unintended consequences that you know of?
I know that JD's here, not here tonight because he's on vacation, but he did talk with these other cities, and he did ask those questions if you had any issues with it, and most said that they have had no problems with in their code, and they've had it in the code for a while now. Some of them had standards in the code and then even revised them to be smaller. So I think the cities that have these have found good success with it, and developers have been able to adapt to it, is what we heard from those cities.
And I think what you said, Karen, is key, the ability to revise. I think if we add this flexibility in, we do have that option later on if we find that it's not working or, we're running into unintended consequences.
Changing the subject slightly to private street. Mr. Fairbank brought that up. Could you address that?
Yeah.
The city's really not in the business of trying to maintain private streets, correct?
Right. We already have language in our code that disallows private streets. So what we're doing is modifying that to make it more clear. What we do allow private streets for large multifamily developments, like you saw the one on Cedar Heights that recently was approved. All their driveways, they're all private streets in a sense. So that kind of development, a commercial development, some sort of large industrial or business park might have some private streets if there's multiple. You guys have approved private streets for like a minor subdivision with a commercial development, like along Prairie Parkway. But when it comes to residential, I think what happens sometimes that people don't know. I know that there's HOA documents that they have to read through and covenants and all that, but a lot of people are caught off guard because they don't realize that they will be on the hook when that street needs to be reconstructed. That's a big expense. And so what happens is they call the city and say, hey, city, we can't afford this. We want you to reconstruct our street. We don't want it to be a private street. Or we get the complaints that people are driving through, what are you going to do about it, city? And it's like, it's your street. You're going to have to do something about it. So the city's put in kind of a tough spot with some of these developments that are lower scale, residential, that people are expecting that they live on a private street. They don't realize necessarily that they're going to be on the hook for all the maintenance and reconstruction of those. And also all the utilities as well are usually private.
But typically, a private street is only utilizing a multifamily housing or townhouse community or something like
Right.
that.
I mean, we have allowed them in different spots. The ones that have been successful are for the larger developments that are larger buildings, where, they're mostly treated as driveways, and people aren't expecting that those are, a lot of times those are rental units. They're not as successful when they're townhomes or duplexes or bi-attached units, because people that live in those units kind of think that they, that their streets need to be maintained by the city.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions for staff or any discussion?
I have one more question. So this makes sense and is obviously easy to diagram when it's a grid and it's 90 degrees. Has there been any thought if this discourages development where streets are, because obviously the block length and the stubbing of the street, it follows the length, it follows the curve of the street, I imagine. So has there been any thought if this discourages more of a organic street flow versus measuring it from, when it's just on a grid?
So the engineers will be able to measure it, the block length, regardless of whether it's a
Right.
curved street and every subdivision has a civil engineer that's designing it. So they would just show us what the length is of those blocks. So it doesn't prevent streets from being a curvilinear pattern.
Right. But I'm just saying, do we think that this might discourage a more organic, curved streets if the same amount of property length, it would be a longer street if it's curved, and therefore you might have to add a stub. That's the only thing that I could see as a deterrent for something. Just curious if there was any discussion about that at all, or if that's even come up. Maybe it hasn't, or in other cases or other cities or anything like that. But
I don't think it will be a problem.
Okay.
But
Any more questions?
Just maybe to piggyback on that point, I do think maybe that's an opportunity then where that flexibility and
Yeah.
the red verbiage on that slide could come into play to, if there is unique topography or different layouts that a development wants, having at least some flexibility in that regard would maybe help with that.
right.
All right. I'm going to make a motion to move this forward with the alternate standard of the flexibility between 200 and 800, which would ultimately change the 2,000 feet to 2,200 feet to accommodate the range.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Alberhaski,
Aye.
Gribovich.
She had to leave.
Oh, she had to leave. Sorry. I didn't see her jump out. Hartley,
Aye.
Henderson,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Moser,
Aye.
Sorensen,
Nay.
Stallnaker,
Aye.
Watkins.
Aye.
Okay. So we will make that change to the code language when we bring it forward to City Council.
Okay. All right, thank you. That concludes old business. Is there any commission updates?
We don't have anything for you tonight.
No commission updates. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you.
Just a heads up, I'm going to be gone next meeting.